around tokenization now. It's pretty new. Tokenization hasn't been around that long. Stocks don't really exist or anything like that, right? Now we're gonna have a good conversation because not only is tokenization the next frontier to making things actually work in blockchain, but we're getting a little bit more clarity day by day with the new administration, and you can finally not be criminals. Yay! Yay for that. Let's go around. Let's get some intros done. Michael, kick it off with you.
Thank you, Action. Thanks, everybody, for joining and online. I'm Michael Hiles. I am the founder, CEO of a company called 10XTS, and we've been in the real-world asset tokenization space since about 2016, 2017, and I'm also a founding partner with Conduit Network, specifically focusing on the asset tokenization component that's embedded inside of the stack.
Beautiful. Brandon, you know about Conduit?
Yeah, Brandon Baker, one of the co-founders and unofficial CEO of Conduit Network. That's it, simple as that.
And sorry, I'm not rude, just texting randomly. I'm posting on Twitter. So I was just posting on my Twitter that I'm live here at DePIN with these fine gentlemen, and I encourage all of you to do the same. Pull your phones out. Let's let people know what we're doing, what we're here about. Take pictures. Tag DePIN Seattle. You can tag me if you want to, but tag the event. And what did you say? We had 50,000 people live.
Peaked at 58. It's in about 53,000.
So let's get that number up even higher. That'd be awesome.
Shout out to Matt. For that.
I guess I should
Solana retweeting this was good.
Yeah, thank you, Solana. NIFMint has an effect too, so we'll probably see at least a couple hundred come up. So, my name is Jonathan G. Blanco. I'm the founder and CEO of NIFMint. What we do is we create digital twins of physical products for brands as a means of product authentication and rewards. So we use tokenization of real-world assets the same way you might think about it in the financial sector. We just apply that to commerce, and then we have a DePIN lens by rewarding people for how they use that product. So instead of thinking about unused bandwidth, it's how do you actually turn a physical product and understand this daily active user component to it. If you think about a company like Apple, which is worth close to $4 trillion, part of their valuation comes in the fact that they know how you operate and use their device. If you're Rolex, you have no idea how someone uses the watch. So when you introduce DePIN mechanics, you can turn a daily active user into these physical products.
I love that you're up here, Jonathan, because it just opens up the conversation. A lot of times we think of tokenization as like, oh, we're gonna go ahead and mint some tokens and say they mean this thing, but it goes way beyond that. There's so much more to it, right? Either Michael or any of you really, how would you explain tokenization, in an elevator pitch, essentially? Because a lot of people, I don't think, understand the scope of it.
So tokenization, you have to come back to the root of the word, token, right? It's something that represents something else. So language, just think in the course of human history, things that represent and mean other things. In the modern era, in this current era, we're talking about a digital twin, as Jonathan said, a token on a blockchain network that is supposed to represent some other thing. Now, just simply minting the token on the blockchain itself, you can point at it in a wallet and say, this token equals something else. But then that claim, because that's what it is, I'm claiming that token represents something else, must be proven. How do you effectively prove immutably and on a trustworthy basis that this digital instrument thing, hash value, some little piece of data, is supposed to represent some fractional interest ownership in, say, a multifamily apartment complex or a physical brand good, right? Dolce & Gabbana handbag, right? So that claim must be proven, and then think in terms of, well, how do we prove things, right? Do we have notary stamps and registrations in government databases for land titles and deeds? these kinds of things. And what you're seeing now is a convergence of the emergence of the technology with the traditional ways that people, society has used to actually validate that this thing is truly what somebody is saying that it represents.
I mean, that's huge, and I love that we're talking about this at DePinDay, because I feel like up until just recently, tokenization has been something that's reserved for governments to validate, right? Like, I got a wedding band on, that means it's love and commitment to my wife, 15 years, but doesn't mean anything unless I have a marriage certificate to go along with it. We're changing that. We're allowing people to actually tokenize things almost at will. Is that fair to say? When done right, I mean, there are steps. I'm not trying to oversimplify. I am oversimplifying it, but we don't need that third party necessarily.
Is your question to a future state? Is it an attempt
It's
to?
where are we going? Is this the path that we're headed in?
I think one of the things that tokenization is trying to solve is velocity of capital and moving and unlocking velocity. But that also means, as Michael has talked about a lot, you have a liquidity issue. Creating a digital twin of something and representative doesn't mean that you have the other side of the market and liquidity to move that value around. But that's the hope and the dream of it, is that every element of commerce is looking at increasing velocity. And if tokenization done right can increase the velocity of capital, increasing GDP, increasing everything for everyone. So that's the aim. The nuance to get there is really big. So we've talked about this a bunch at with Michael and at Conduit, as well as, like, you have to be able to separate different rights and obligations in order to accomplish that. Creating a digital twin of something doesn't get you anywhere where we need to go, especially in any complex type of financial asset or financial arrangement. So take something that's like really, really simple. You have a bank account. You go deposit that money into the bank account, right? Everybody has this. There's 4 fundamental rights within the legal system: the right of ownership, the right of possession, the right of use, and the right of destruction. In that arrangement to putting money in the bank, the right of use is yours and the bank's, because they fractionally lend it. The right of ownership is yours, the right of possession is the bank, and the right of destruction is the Federal Reserve. So in that simple transaction, you have 4 parties across 4 rights that are separated. All tokens today don't separate those rights. It assumes that if you hold the token, you hold all those rights within it. So that's fundamental. Like, if we don't get to that stage, take land, the separation of water rights, mineral rights, beyond just the deed of the land, or the land versus the building that's on top of it. There's a lot that happens here, and what you need to be able to do is move those rights independently, because different parties could have the right over, the right over those rights at any given time and can move independently. Take supply chains. We're going to talk about, tokenizing inventory. Well, on average, as that ship goes across from, let's say, China to the United States, those rights change on average 12 times. How do you account for that? If you just have a digital twin of what that inventory is, that doesn't signify the actual change of rights from different parties at given states. So until we get to that stage and being able to deploy there, we're not going to do the things that I think everyone wants to do with tokenization until we're able to accomplish that, which is something in particular that Conduit has been working very heavily on. And specifically, Michael, I'm stealing a bit of his thunder here, but Tokenization 2.0 is bringing in like the next level of where we are today in tokenization, where we need to get to start bringing in large volumes of activity and capital.
I think to your point, Brandon, just like with any technology, you have infrastructure layer and then you have consumer layer, or call it the enterprise business layer. And so, yeah, just tokenizing something, you still need to have the information layer, and where is that information being, the things that are being tokenized, like what does that even represent? What does that unlock? What does it cause access to? So, ERP software, commerce software, supply chain software, all of that is needed. You can't just tokenize without it. I'll come at it from the context of what I do, and I'm sure there's a bunch of it. How many people are engineers in the room or have an engineering background? quite a bit, right? So you've all heard of the concept of tokenization before cryptocurrency, before blockchain. All a token is essentially like a packet of information. The easiest way I like to think about tokenization is, from a product context, is that you have a digital wrapper around a content file, and that digital wrapper is basically the unique identifier around that piece of content. From NIFMINT's context, we believe that everything will be tokenized. Every product that you purchase will have a digital twin. And someone might say like, oh, even my $5 t-shirt that I get from Target. Yeah, even the $5 t-shirt that you get from Target. But you got to remember, what's the lens that you're looking at it through? If you're looking at it through the lens of today, there's no reason why you would do that. If you look at that through the lens of 10 years from now, when you've already become accustomed to having other interactions that have been tokenized throughout that process, that's when it begins to make sense. Mind you, I don't think an average consumer or end consumer, or even a brand for that matter, should even care or know about tokenization. All they really care about, again, from our context, is product authentication. Counterfeit goods is a $3 trillion industry every single year. So not only is that a loss of revenue, but that's also a loss in brand perception. So no brand likes to know that they have counterfeit goods of their products out there. So when you create a digital twin, you can map the information that's in that physical product to the digital product, and now you have a one-to-one interaction. In the prior chat, we were talking about AI agents, and I think AI agents are really interesting. It comes up a lot in commerce as well. But one of the biggest problems about AI agents is it has an oracle problem. Like, so where's the truth of data that you are building this AI agent off of, which is another use case and another reason is why you need to tokenize information. So that way, when you build AI agents, you're building it based off of verifiable, authenticated data in chain of custody. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have talked about this extensively because the rationale of why everything will be tokenized is agentic commerce. You're not going to connect an AI agent to your bank account through Plaid, right? It's just not going to be feasible. You're not going to let some software component run autonomously to go out there and conduct commerce, trade, and capital markets, et cetera. You've got to have some controlled, highly secure, immutable mechanism that designates here's money on one side, whether that's stable coin or some other commercial transactional settlement layer value, and then here's this thing that I'm buying. Again, whether that's a premium brand, whether that's fractional interest in, say, a piece of fine art, for example. Those AI agents are going to start trading with each other in the future. And we got a ways to go from a regulatory standpoint and capital markets standpoint, et cetera, depending on the segment. But this is the mechanism that's going to enable the nexus between agentic commerce and the real world transactional control, whether it's inside of an enterprise supply chain, whether that's at the direct retail level, right? There are going to be advancements in the next 5 to 7 years. Things are going to start to come online, and this is that mechanism that's going to enable that to happen.
I love when we talk about how this stuff is going to work in the future, but the same question comes up. Doesn't matter if we're talking about IoT, it doesn't matter if it's telco, like, it doesn't matter. Privacy is a big deal, and I think privacy and security kind of go hand in hand. I would love to have an AI agent tell me exactly what I'm going to wear tomorrow based on the RF tags on my clothes, but I don't want anybody to know what else is in my closet. How do we get to the point where we are able to not only tokenize things, but also obfuscate what one individual may or may not have?
I don't think there's one silver bullet, first of all. This is a plethora, and I think it was said before, security is a spectrum, and same with privacy, same with all these tools, right? So we have things out there like ZK proofs, but the problem is that they're extremely expensive. Conduit in particular is working on something that would be called composable proofs, which has elements of ZK and many other things, but what you're doing is using, as an example, in a mesh of proofs, you're using ZK in a very specific way to reduce the overall cost in which it's being used. So versus that being the answer, being very costly. But I would say, first of all, there's not one answer. The other thing is that we typically see that security, privacy, and all these things actually aren't on the forefront of consumers' mind until there's a problem. And so that's the other thing right now that we have in any innovative technology, is that you typically, as you're trying to get adoption, you're feeding to the market in what they want fed. And security and privacy and everything else is not sexy, yet it's vitally important. And so I think that's why it's lagging a little bit, because this is an innovative space that's out on the edge of innovation, and you're pushing into what people actually, consumers are wanting to be fed. But you have really good groups and a lot of people that are working on it. It absolutely is extremely vital, particularly that I talked about this, tokenization is going to increase, as long as it can reduce friction, it will increase velocity. So that's great, but the problem with that is that if you still have a fundamental flaw in a first principle, like with security or privacy, all you're doing is increasing that exposure point at a greater magnitude and velocity. And so these are really, really core first principles that should be worked on, should have a higher point of emphasis. They certainly do with us. That is part of our DNA, is that we just purely believe this. People will not move value to things that they can't trust. It won't obtain value and increase value to things that can't be trusted. So if you don't start with the first principle of trust, which is actually, I mean, right now we have the lowest amount of trust in our society that we've ever had in institutions, in government, and everywhere, in your neighbors, looking at one another. We have the lowest trust ever. That is actually what we should be doing, is solving for, taking technology and have it solve for increasing trust in society.
I don't want to contradict you, because it's not a contradiction, but I have a slightly different point of view. And I don't think it's trust, I think it's value. And I think it's also like perceived value, right? Because I don't know that anybody here necessarily trusts Meta with your data, but you all use Instagram or Facebook. I use this example ad nauseum, and so forgive me if you've heard this before, but when Cambridge Analytica had that issue, you had people from Instagram saying, like, I'm never using my Facebook ever again. Same company. So it's like it's the same issue, but there's enough value that consumers get from having their, posting on there, sharing on there, et cetera. So what I think the value, the reason why I say the value element, of course there's, you need basic trust, obviously, but it's permissioned, permission value or permissioned interest, right? So I'm willing to share data if I get to participate in the value creation, or you have some sort of perception of what my data contributes to the network. So that's how we think about it in a NIFMint context is, hey, if you don't want to earn for wearing, no problem, just don't share your information. Anybody who has an iPhone out right here, every single one of your apps is tracking you in the background, right? We just know that. That's just happening. You might turn it off and then you come on and you're using it. So I think the biggest problem isn't necessarily the trust side of it, though trust is important. It's the perception of value that you get. And that's what I think is one of the really interesting things about DePIN, is that you can say, hey, there's a value exchange here, and if you think the value exchange is adequate, then go ahead and participate in the network.
See, I see it as both sides of the same coin. You can't have value without the trust, and you can't have trust.
That's why I said I'm not contradicting. Right? It's just like a slight.
Yeah, it's a nuance. I mean, look, why is a dollar bill worth something, arguably, whatever that is, and a piece of monopoly money not worth something? They're both ink on paper.
Go ahead, Jonathan. You got something. Go ahead.
We have
I was going to say the military-industrial.
Right, the military-industrial complex. Yeah, that's right. The petrodollar. It's the shared fiction that everyone agrees that this form of design on this type of paper with this type of ink issued by this institution is actually the real currency, whereas the board game Monopoly money is not, right? And so, I read the book Sapiens years ago, and it was really interesting deep dive into the psyche of human group psychology around the agreements that we make. Why is 12 o'clock noon, 12 o'clock noon, right? We all agree that it means the same thing, right? So how do you anchor those proof points to bring the trust together with the value simultaneously? And that's the amazing thing about the current state of technology and where it's going, is you're able to actually do that.
And I would expand on both sides. You nailed what you said. And I think where we might have started was using using technology to enable trust. But even the process that you talked about in choice gives trust.
Right. Yeah.
Right? There's trust in my ability to now have a choice on what I'm doing with my data or tokenization or any of the things that we're talking about here. The other thing that was interesting that you talked about when we said proofs is that we're very much looking at proofs in binary form, a one-to-one proof that I've proven this thing to execute this process and an outcome. But where I think we're also going is a mesh of proofs. So you end up building a trust profile based off of a plethora of proofs that you have done in a multitude of transactions, which means now you have a trust over you as an individual among all this different transaction that you've done. It doesn't mean that anything critical is exposed. It means that you are now a trusted individual to work with for a multitude of things. And so I think you'll end up growing a profile in this way as well, without exposing any critical data of who you are, what the transactions were, what occurred there, but it was simply that you had a proven trusted transaction.
And to add to that, it's not just a single point of trust, it's how your trust interacts with other trust. And compounded and compounded and compounded, and it's not like a centralized source of that either. So that's what makes that so interesting. It's like not just how you interact with one network or one individual, it's across everything and compounding that.
I totally agree. And historically, we use trust agents, right? How do I trust you? Right? You have a birth certificate that's registered in the health department in the county of your birth. The government says this piece of paper means that Brandon Baker is Brandon Baker, right? Now we're moving into this decentralization and decentralization of social data and knowledge and information. So how are we simultaneously breaking paradigms but bringing new equal trust paradigms? Because in the future, I don't know what it's going to look like. Again, we're future state action, but will you have a hash value that represents, say, your mitochondrial helix of DNA information in a decentralized identity network somewhere? I don't know, but that's literally, you're talking about the essence of tokenizing your identity that cascades into from some trusted network of data and information into other security authentication mechanisms downstream.
All right, Bert, let's bring it back just a little bit. Let's avoid the yeah, this is too much. Let's go KYC, because that's still identifying somebody. Is that a type of tokenization, and is there a way to maybe call that, or parts of KYC essentially can you tokenize that?
Well, it's third-party proof. It goes back to the fact that the FATF and the government says to financial institutions, in order to combat anti-terrorism financing, we have to know who is the two-legged entity underneath all of the layers of fictitious legal entities that is sponsoring value transaction. And oh, by the way, if they're doing it with your financial institution, it's your job to identify that and report on it, or we'll haul you, Mr. Banker, out in handcuffs, right? So now the banks are all deer in the headlights saying, oh, how do we validate this? The problem is, when you think in terms of tokenization, well, I've tokenized something, I've got a piece of data on a network somewhere, one and done, all right? And particularly with your instance action that you've posited, KYC is not a one-time event. People think that it is, right? Oh, I get KYC to open my bank account, I dance on down the road. The truth of the matter is status changes, right? What if I end up, say I'm single, right? I open a bank account, I go through identity verification, and then I meet some beautiful Sudanese warlord's daughter, and I end up married to her downstream.
Yeah, I don't. It's very specific.
No, my wife's
isn't
in the back, so she's not Sudanese. She's a sweet country girl from Indiana. But but point being is statuses can change, right? Things can change. I could move next door to a mafia crime boss, and now we've got this side thing going, right? This thing of ours. And so we've got that shifting standard, and because the burden of proof has been placed on financial institutions with criminal liability attached to it, now there's this conservatism that has crept in, so much so that that's even gotten more emphatic with things like the Operation Choke Point 2.0, which, dear Lord, please bring it to an end.
Bank of America put out a post. I don't know if you saw it.
Yeah,
You guys are
I
okay.
did see it, yeah. But, and there's other reasons for that as well. I mean, obviously, the big banks are, trying to do their, I was like, JP Coin's been around for how long now, right? So use our network, don't do something else independent out here. So, yeah, it's just really interesting because you do have that continuum of proof to a claim, right? Identity. How do things change?
All right, now talking about DePINs here, why is tokenization important for the stuff that we do? Because I think, to me, there's a little bit of uncertainty when I'm buying a token. Like, okay, great, I'm mine geoed, right? That token, does that represent the value in the company itself, or is it just a speculative token? A lot of times we just don't know what things are. So where does tokenization fall when it comes to DePINs?
Well, I don't want
Are you asking from a current state today?
A current, I love the future. So if you want to know, if you want to share with us where
It's
we should
always
be
like
going.
where are we today, and where do we
Yeah.
need to get? Because much of this is not in full fruition at all. The question is, how is DePIN using tokenization? I think overall, first of all, how tokenization is used is very, very simple in today's sense. That's kind of where we started to go, is like where we need to go is a very much different step. Different than what Jonathan's doing. Again, you've got, I should have clarified this. You have two individuals that are probably talking at very much institutional levels in both capital formation, capital movement, economies, supply chains, value chains, all over here. And then, Jonathan, you're much more focused on consumer level, right? And so just so that we're clear on how we're kind of talking through this. But the reality, let's move out back from DePIN even and just say that, again, tokenization, what it should be doing is reducing intermediaries, reducing friction, and increasing velocity. That's what it should be doing.
I mean, that applies to consumers as well. If I want to buy a purse from you, I want to know that thing is real.
It does, but my point to this is that in order for me to reduce intermediaries, increase velocity, and reduce friction in an institutional setting is a lot different solve than what you've got at a consumer level.
And also, you have to consider the distinction between a fungible versus a non-fungible token, where you have a serialized, unique physical thing, and it is that thing and only that thing, right? A serial number on a dollar bill, or a serial, number 212 out of 500 for some limited run collectible, right? That is a different use case than, say, a fungible token, where each of the tokens equally represents the exact same fractional value as another one just like it. So you have like pennies, right? Each penny equals a penny, and there's 100 of them in a dollar. Pennies aren't serialized. You got a penny, right? And 100 of them equals a dollar. Whereas a dollar is serialized. You look at any dollar bill, there's a unique serial number on it. So there's a distinction and a difference.
Yeah, the fungible to non-fungible definitely makes a difference. The thing that fascinates me the most about crypto is the fact that it's programmable. That's really, and that's, at the end of the day, that's what we're all talking about. So you have fungible that's programmable, you have non-fungible that's programmable. So you're talking about programmable money. That's why JP Morgan's coin is really interesting for them, is, they can, do cross-border payments and reconcile within their own groups with their own stable currency. When you think about an NFT or a non-fungible, is you are programming at the product level, which has never been done before. When you talk about analog and digital, I like to disagree with the fact that we live in a digital world. Honestly, what I like to say is that we just consume things on digital devices, but a lot of things that happen just takes place strictly on that digital device. So to make this as simple for everybody else is, if you bought a handbag and you went to an e-commerce site, what's programmable in that whole process is the header page, the product display page, the checkout page. At no point is the bag itself programmable. When you create a digital twin of something, or you essentially tokenize, now you're creating a programmable product at a product level. So that's the way you can think about it from, you know, a brand, a retail, consumer context. It's the same thing with money, is you're actually programming at the money level, not at the system that's transferring the money. So that becomes very interesting. That allows for a lot more utility throughout.
All right, let's stir the pot here a little bit. I want to hear if you guys have any questions. Wow. Oh, by the way, if we can make sure we have somebody checking online, if anybody's got questions online as well.
It's either a good sign or a bad sign.
It's a neutral sign. You know what?
Yeah, they are serialized. All right.
there we go.
Cool.
Go ahead,
Yeah, I'll
Mike.
go back to Action's question. How can DePIN use tokenization? I don't think I really got an answer for that question.
That's a great question, because I was sitting here thinking, well, we didn't actually answer the question and address it. So from a conduit standpoint, you have tokenization of obviously some form of value, right? Compute. Compute itself is monitored, metered, and measured inside of the ledger of the system itself. And then the reward that someone is receiving is also a tokenized mechanism of value that's paying somebody for bringing that compute. Helium, ICP, you've got these networks that have figured out, I can take some physical infrastructure and figure out how to monitor it, meter it, measure it, and then translate that into a reward mechanism that is a digital unit of value. Now for conduit, the way that we've architected the system, the process of measuring, monitoring, metering the compute that's being provided to the network, and subsequently people are consuming it and using it on the other side of the transaction, the mechanism that's doing that and also determining who gets the reward and how much for doing so, we've made that work in such a way with not only the network and the network node resources, but we can put any other asset into that ledger on the network with those rights that Brandon talked about, the separation of the fundamental property rights of the right of ownership, the right of possession, the right of use, right of destruction, and actually tokenize those rights independent of the asset itself. The same infrastructure literally is used to tokenize real estate, corporate cap tables of shareholder ownership, or any other real-world asset that can be enumerated and made provable with the corresponding mechanism of those rights. Now, conduit's a DLT. It's not a blockchain at the core. So we've got a distributed ledger that's replicated, it's DLT technology, but then on demand, we provide the capability so someone can take an asset that's been recorded on that ledger and then tokenize it on demand by materializing that token into a layer one network. Now you've got a wrapped ERC token, for example, that would represent a piece of value that's monitored, recorded, and accounted for on the conduit network itself, but not everybody uses conduit, right? At least yet. You've got to be able to trade value on existing current L1 rails. So now I've got an ERC token that can be moved into institutional marketplaces, into institutional custody, depending on the asset use and the requirement. And the goal is to be cross-chain, multi-chain, with a very highly secured mechanism to be able to do that.
All right. Talk to me about real money, not the one that's backed by hopes and dreams.
Real money, real money. Well, as we all know, that Federal Reserve notes are fiction at best. We like these things called goldbacks. How many in here have heard of goldbacks? Raise your hand. A few people. That's cool. Awesome. So I met the founder of the company that makes goldbacks. It's actually a company called Aurum, and I became completely fascinated with these guys because I'm a gold guy. I like things that actually represent real world value. And so for those that don't know, a gold back is actually physical gold that has been sent through this proprietary process where they literally spray the gold onto a polymer substrate and then they print beautiful artwork on it. It's just like $1, you know, like any currency bill. And so I like to use these when we're out at events and things and say, hey, Conduit Network, we're the gold standard of tokenization, right? But for today, we're giving away a few of these.
I already gave some away on the stream during lunch.
Did you really?
I did.
Sweet.
I did. But we want to give them away here, right?
We're going to physically give them away here in the audience. So, you want one? My man, there you go. No, it's for you.
Well,
Frame it, it's for you.
You don't get to participate since you're up here, so let's
yeah,
get
you don't get
everybody
to
else here to participate.
So, everybody look underneath your seat.
Sorry,
We're
Chris.
digging for gold. And I am not responsible for where they landed because Action taped them to the bottom of the seat.
Oh, Mike's got one.
Lift them up. Raise them up when you get one.
Right there.
Oh, awesome. We got back there. Who else?
Oh, we got a third right
Oh,
there.
we got one here.
There you go.
We got a third one here. All right, guys.
It's like the,
This is 1/1000th of an ounce of gold, so it's not like you're gonna, even buy yourself a steak dinner. It's worth approximately $4-ish in fiat money right now. But the cool thing is it's assayable. You can melt it down at a jewelry smelter and turn it into actual liquid, molten gold. So we're really into that because we see a future where everything becomes a function of currency, where any asset in the right environment and framework, probably with a DePIN involved somehow, conduit network, that everything can become currency in the future. And that's the idea of really how to fractionalize that value.
I mean, I know, Brandon, you talk about points all the time. I mean, that's the best example of tokenization, that these companies go out there and expect you not to use at least 20% of that, right?
yeah, I think that's one. I think if you start bringing in validation into the tokenization model as well, so like imagine that you have a vault of gold sitting in there, right? And they can measure the exact amount of that gold in that vault based off of gas changes, right? So you know exactly how much is in there and how it comes out. If all that's tokenized and all that data from the IoT is then going into the exact same, let's say, composable proofs, right? Now everything is verifiable on-chain in an immutable state, and so you know exactly what's happening at any point, which means you think about how we're doing that today, and much of it's done in paper. And so there could be a live change here in the setting of anything that you have in terms of value, and you don't have that recorded. Right, so I think when we get to that state, when we're combining everything that we kind of said here today with an end result, which is tokenization of value, that's when you're going to then land on an increased trust, velocity, speed of capital, and that's when we'll know that we've made it to where we need to get to.
So when's that happening on Conduit?
Yep, Monday, maybe. Working on it.
Awesome. Jonathan, let me get you back. Oh, you got a question? Yeah, please. Here, we're going to get a mic over to you so people can hear you online as well. Just thousands of people listening, no pressure.
Okay, I actually have a simple question, like how would you evaluate a good tokenization and what makes it a bad tokenization for like a protocol infra? How would you evaluate it?
So I'll field that one from at least an institutional regulatory standpoint because that's the world in which I live. A good tokenization project complies with the law, first and foremost. You're talking about a token that represents an actual share of stock. So the token equals a share of stock. So if somebody thinks that they're going to go out there and mint a bunch of tokens on an L1 blockchain and call them equity shares in their company and then not comply with existing SEC regulations, you're going to federal court. Rule number one, stay out of prison. Okay? We clear on that, everybody? It's like, I don't look good on orange jumpsuits. So that would be my first benchmark. Now, interestingly, and that's an interesting question for more reasons than maybe you understand, The promise of tokenization early on was everybody says, hey, tokenize it and the magic liquidity fairy will come and sprinkle her dust all over everything. It'll be amazingly liquid. That's not true. In fact, it's probably less liquid than if you would have just left it traditional over-the-counter type of a transaction, because now you've pigeonholed that thing, whatever it is that you tokenized, into a very narrow, specific technology network and a technology architecture, right? Does your custodian support that? Right? We've had people come to us for years and say, well, I want to tokenize shares of stock in my company. Which layer 1 should I do it on? Well, do you have a custodian? Who do they support? You know, deer in the headlights, right? You know, what do you mean? And we've had projects come to us and say, we've already made our securities token. Now we want to take it to market. And I'm like, okay, cool. How did you embed your regulatory compliance into the smart contract for the token that you created? Oh, you mean we have to do that? Yeah. So if you don't want to rip and replace and have a massive tech redo, and you are particularly talking about things that are regulated, which are, you know, the obvious, right? Real estate is a regulated asset, right? You have to transact in a certain way. You have to record the deed at the county recorder's office, right? There's things that you must do and things that you cannot and should not do to conform with the regulations. That would be my first and foremost shining example of how to evaluate whether a tokenization project is good or bad.
Are tokens transformable in the sense of if you're working with perishable goods? For example, if you're a farmer and you buy seed and that seed is tokenized, and that seed now turns into wheat or something, and you're selling that wheat. If the token is a digital twin, how does it transform from the seed to the wheat to the food product to then perished?
That itself is a spectacular question. We've wrestled with this one in particular with respect to things like tokenized carbon credits, right? I've got this carbon credit that I have a tax implication on, and then I use it and it's gone. But yet this digital twin unit of an account exists on a blockchain forevermore, right? So I think it's going to be use case specific first and foremost, and you do raise a very interesting, morphosis, right? I buy seed from a seed producer and I put it in the ground and plant it, and then it becomes wheat, right? But then it doesn't stop there. That wheat becomes, animal feed or flour for bread, or even bread itself, right? So that morphosis and that continuum of how things evolve, architecturally, it's very difficult to contemplate that right now with the existing state of technology. In the future, I think that you're going to see standards where smart contracts or computable contracts can be developed that incorporates future value additive transformation that's part of that same fundamental unit of value that starts at the core.
So I don't know that it's an actual technical problem. I think it's more of a philosophy problem and an architecture problem than anything, because I could think of a way that you would do that right now. I just don't know that that would be the correct way to do it, right? So
burn a mint.
Right. For example, like you could say like, hey, like there's a seed token, and then once that seed goes in the ground, we burn that token and that generates a new token. You could do that. You could make the metadata, update throughout. So there's ways to solve this technically. And forgive me for any of the engineers out there not to oversimplify blockchain, but like a lot of the issue with all code is the philosophy or the architecture or the structure or like how things plug. Writing a smart contract, super simple, like it's basically the same smart contract, maybe you make some adjustments to it. How that smart contract works within a network and what it does and how it locks, unlocks, all that's where all the complexity lies, right? So I think it's technically possible. It's are you willing to, if you were, let's say you were creating that product or that situation, like, are you willing to stand by the philosophy of whether it's burning the token or having it, having the metadata update, So yeah, that's the part that'll be really interesting to see, is how people think about that.
I don't think it's a technical problem at all, actually. I think it's law and accounting. These things don't change, at least unless that's what you're going after, to go affect those. But the reality is, in your scenario, you would have inventory and raw goods that are then converting. Like those things and how that process goes, technology is not going to change. It actually needs to follow that. So you need the technology to follow that. So the constraint here is not technological. It's these other elements that traditionally have been later to actually come into the architecture and design that they need to in order to get to the level that we're talking about. So it's a really good question, but it's not a technological problem. I just don't actually see it occurring because of like how accounting works, as an example, right? Like the form of value is changing. It needs to be accounted for differently.
All right, I'm really excited that we had an opportunity to get into tokenization, because it's boring until we start talking about it. And then it's like, oh, there's a lot more to it. So thank you all so much. I wish we had more time to talk about this, but we got to go to our next session. So again, you guys have full access to the speakers that are up here as they come off, and please take advantage of it. Don't make a call while we're here. That'd be great.